I will shortly introduce them. Dimitris is a software engineer at Elli. He's focusing on backend development. And since Elli has it, you build it, you run it culture, he's also working a lot on infrastructure and reliability topics. Katja is a software consultant from Team G. And before she started working in a project with Elli on electric mobility services, she was a researcher on the intersection of quantum informatics and machine learning. And I think now we are all curious to know how you can really like incidents. Thank you.
Right. Thanks for the introduction, Steffi. So this is us. And as Steffi mentioned, we both work with Elli. So let's talk about Elli for a sec. Elli is a brand of the Volkswagen Group, and we are responsible for all the activities around energy and charging within the group. Our goal is to make our life with electricity easier, more reliable, and completely free of any hassle. And we build B2B and B2C products focusing on charging and green energy. If you're interested into our tech stack, there's going to be soon a LinkedIn post about our Techradar. So if you find this interesting, you should follow us on LinkedIn. And yeah, this doesn't work.
Some of them are not.
Yeah, and in case you want to spearhead the automotive revolution while working on cool problems and using bleeding edge technologies, you should definitely join us because we're currently hiring. And with all of this out of the way, let's start. It's 8th of August, 2016. Atlanta, US. It's early morning. John, an operations engineer from Delta Airways, is having breakfast. Suddenly his phone rings. It's an incident. Everything is going down. 5 hours later, the Delta engineers managed to put everything under control. However, the aftermath doesn't look so good. The 5-hour outage costed Delta Airways $150 million. That's quite an incident. It's big enough that somebody would mention in his talk 5 years later. So, okay, but what about more harmful incidents? What about the average incident? According to Gartner, the cost of an average outage is $5,600 per minute. And to put this in a different perspective, you could get a VW ID3 for every 8 minutes of downtime.
Disclaimer, may contain product placements.
Yeah. So I guess by now I have your attention, and we all agree that incidents are important. So what do we do? There are different ways you can approach this. You can try and build safeguards for your systems. You can try to make them more reliable by installing more processes, try to take the human factor out of it. I don't know, do more extensive QA tests, or maybe release less often. I mean, what's this whole craziness with CI/CD? Like, why deploy all the time? Like, if you deploy things, they're going to break, right? Wrong. This is a misconception. No matter what you do, things are going to fail. The systems we're currently building, like nowadays, they're inherently chaotic. So no matter what you do, things are going to fail, and they're going to fail in ways you don't expect because of all the interdependencies within the system. So then what should we do? My proposal is that we should focus on preparing the engineers for incidents. We should accept the fact that there are going to be incidents. We should embrace this failure, let's say, and try to prepare our engineers the best way possible so when incidents happen, they are able to deal with them in the best possible way.
And to see how they can deal with the incidents, let's maybe look first at what might happen during an incident. Now, I should stress that this is not something that happened at Elli. Think of this as a sort of mirror universe cousin of Elli. But here's Eddie, the development engineer, and he was having a good time during the night. He was fast asleep until at around 2 in the morning, his phone rang and he had an incident. So the first thing he wanted to do was to get some colleagues on the job as well, 4-hour principle and all that, get some input, except there was nobody around to help him. So he said, okay, I guess I'll have to tackle this by myself. And he started trying to figure out what on earth was going on, trying to make sense of a foot-long error message, and maybe looking into the logs. But he discovered that his log queries actually yielded different results depending on the order in which he sent them. So that was a bit confusing. And then he decided, okay, if all else fails, let me go back to the documentation, which was an enormous pile with update dates ranging everywhere from 3 months ago to 5 years ago. Not terribly helpful. So as a sort of desperate last resort, he just goes, you know what, I'll redeploy and hope for the best. So he goes in the online console and he finds the redeploy button, and then he hits the big red button, map, permission denied. So hopefully you've never been in quite that situation, but probably a lot of people here can empathize that you don't want to be there. So we want to do better. We want to make sure that, for one thing, we've got enough responders to make sure that every time there's an incident, there's somebody well-rested, hopefully 2 somebodies to tackle the problem together. We want to make sure that the people who do tackle the incidents have good tooling for figuring out what's going on and fixing it. We want to make sure that we've got properly established protocols for how to handle an incident. And most importantly, we want to make sure that the people responding to the incident have had a chance to share knowledge on the different domains they'll be looking at, to really gain confidence, and really the most fundamental thing, that they just have hands-on experience for how to respond.
Wait a second. So you talk about hands-on experience. So yeah, okay, we need experienced engineers. So how do you get this hands-on experience? Are you saying we should create incidents and break production?
Okay, maybe I wouldn't suggest breaking production, but there is in fact a way to achieve all this. And moreover, you can do that in just 2 days. And since I'm from TNG, and as we say, testen nicht glauben, I'm not just going to claim that. I actually have evidence to back it up. So we ran a 2-day exercise, and this is some of the feedback we got from the people who trained and practiced during these incidents. And now you want to know, how on earth did they achieve this? Well, the answer is game days. So in case you were looking at our title for the past week and wondering what it is, game days basically means you deliberately stage incidents on an environment that is not production. It's close to production, but it's safe, in an effort to give your responders a chance to practice, to refine the protocols, and also to give everyone a chance to find weaknesses before they turn into real incidents.
And of course, you cannot have game days without incidents. So let's talk incidents.
Wait, do you want to blow up a rocket?
Actually, do you think we should use this for training? That's an interesting idea.
I mean, yes, it is interesting. I mean, nobody's going to complain it's not engaging, but you can't just blow up a rocket.
Oh, you definitely can. Like, it shouldn't be that difficult, right?
Okay, no, let me rephrase. You can't blow up a rocket without flattening everything in a 50-yard radius.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you have to do a little bit of tweaking, but imagine of all the learnings, right? Like, you can figure out how much internal pressure your spacecraft can withstand. Or like, look at the fire, like you can figure out different ways to deploy your firefighters.
Okay, yes, very good learnings. But I think the point was to focus on learnings about Elli's online services.
Right. Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, incident management, right? Yeah, design incidents, right, let's do that. So in order to design incidents, we had a series of workshops where like we did a lot of different things I'm going to explain. And in the end, we came up with incidents that we're going to have for the game days. So first, we started with a question. What should you learn from an incident? And we had 2 things that we wanted to optimize for. And these are exposure to most of our services and exposure to our core technologies. Of course, apart from this, like with any incident, you're going to learn how to handle the incident and how to behave during an outage. But this, like you get with any design, let's say. But we also want to use this opportunity to teach specific things to people. For example, as I said, like to show them oral service landscape and the different domains. This means that we have to perform incidents on as many different services as possible. And our core technologies, meaning like Postgres, GCP, and maybe let's say Kubernetes in GCP or Cloud Run, or RPG for the API gateway. So we wanted to have at least one incident for each of these core technologies. And also during those incidents, focus a bit more on, let's say, some intricacies of the specific technology. So we gathered all the facilitators. After we came up with this, let's say, optimization criteria, we gathered all the facilitators, and basically the facilitators are the people that are going to run the incidents during the game days. And then we brainstorm on more concrete ideas. So we listed all the technologies and stuff, and maybe to give you some concrete examples, like we came up with things that looked like, let's say if you have an incident on your database where the database is deleted and then you have to restore it from backups, or somebody kills a proxy in RPG and then you have to restore it.
So yeah, as you can see, there were a lot of ideas gathered. And in fact, we faced the question, how do we even pick our favorites?
Right. Yeah, that's a problem, because especially when you brainstorm, you have a lot of ideas. So you need to figure out a way to rate these ideas. So we came up with a rating system that had 3 dimensions. First was realism, meaning how likely is this incident going to happen on production? And of course, we also used inspiration when we did this brainstorm, inspiration from real incidents. So some of them were pretty realistic. Second, information gain, meaning how much knowledge do people get out of this incident? And third, feasibility, like, okay, you can design something that's very realistic and maybe you get a lot out of it, but you still have to perform it in an hour, right? So yeah, it should be easy to set it up. And to give you an example of this rating, let's say you have an incident where, let's say you have high latency in one of your endpoints because an index is missing. So this is quite realistic. It actually happened in one of our production systems. You gain a lot out of it. You can teach people about indexes in Postgres, and I think this is very valuable, especially for new engineers. And it's also quite feasible to set it up. Like you just delete the index, you create some traffic, and yeah, that's it.
So yeah, at this point, we had this nicely curated list of incidents we wanted to run. And then we sat down and did some more homework and refined them into really proper playbooks, where we wrote down explicitly what we actually needed to do. Like on what domain can you run that, or on what service, based on the technologies that are used in that service. Which environment should you use? Do you have to use a sandbox environment that's as close to production as possible? Or can you maybe use a stage environment instead? What are the side effects when you run that effect? And also, who are the external stakeholders whom you should let know that they shouldn't expect their APIs to respond as usual in those days? And of course, for the facilitators, how do you go about setting up the incident? What do you need to delete? What kind of traffic do you need to create? How much traffic? To what endpoint do you need authorizations for that? All those questions that otherwise somebody would be facing on Monday morning when they're sitting in a room full of people. Finally, we were also careful to detail how that incident could be fixed afterwards, in part as a hint to participants if they got stuck, but also to make sure that we could get the cleanup done properly within a reasonable time frame before the next time slot started. So we had this all nicely detailed. And now comes a very crucial part, practice. Because for one thing, the first time you actually try and trigger that incident, you will learn a great many things. For example, you might discover that if somebody else is trying to cause an incident on the same domain at the same time, this is not a good idea. Or you might learn that the stage environment you were thinking about is not actually as similar to production as you thought. You might discover that your alerting has some parameters that nobody thought about, which would make your incidents very long indeed if you don't reset them. You learn about which permissions you need. You learn about maybe flaws in the documentation that you wanted to need. All very important points, just to drive the point home. Do your dry runs. It is definitely worthwhile. And not just to refine your incidents, but also because at this point, even though the game days hadn't started yet, we had already learned so much about our systems, about how the alerting works, about how the analysis works, and possible flaws that we could fix before we even started the game days, that this was definitely worthwhile. So now we had the incidents. The next question was, how exactly is this supposed to go down? who gets which incident on what service at what time with which facilitator and so on. So the basic problem is quite straightforward, really. You've got a number of people that you want to divide into groups of a certain size. You have a set of incidents that you want to give to them in different permutations. You want to make sure that the incidents are not...
Wait. It doesn't have to be always that complicated. So let me tell you a story. Actually, this is not the first time that Elli is doing game days. 1 year ago, we are in a situation where I think almost after 2 years of developing features, we're going to go live. So before that, I don't know, 2-3 months before, we started building our monitoring and our alerting infrastructure, and everything was in place, apart from one thing. We didn't have people to join the on-call. And I mean, you can always find those crazy thrill junkies that, they will join the on-call team just for the fun of it. But most people didn't have experience with this thing and they didn't know what to expect. So then what do we do? Game days is the answer. So back then we were, I think, around 40 engineers, 20 backend engineers. So we gathered all these backend engineers and 3 of them were facilitating. So they designed all the incidents. We got all in a room, like virtual room, because we're still in COVID. And then we started destroying Sandbox. We gave it a night we would never forget. And yeah, it was fun. So this approach is very straightforward. Like you gather everybody, go in a room, do the instance sequentially. It has the huge advantage that it's very straightforward to schedule. So there is like the scheduling problem here is trivial, but it has the problem that it doesn't scale well. So I would say the maximum amount of people you want to do this with is 8 people, because we have the experience from these first game days that with 17 people participating, it was not really engaging for all of them. So some of them were really active and trying to solve things, but a lot of them were, sitting on the back seat, just watching what's happening. And this is not good, because this exercise is all about being hands-on and gaining experience through doing things. And yeah, you want to avoid the situation where people are just watching. So with this in mind, let's fast forward 1 year. Elli is growing like crazy. Our engineering department doubled in size. And now we have to organize game days for around, actually more than 40 engineers.
And that brings us right back to the original problem. I mean, I have to say, as somebody who was raised on theoretical physics, I kind of enjoyed that bit. But let's pick out the practical aspects here. So you've got a few parameters that matter. You want the number of participants, which, as we just saw, had risen dramatically. And you want to split them up into teams such that everybody has a chance to take the driver's seat. Second parameter is how many environments or services do you have to spread your incidents around? And of course, the third important factor is how much time are you willing to spend on this? Because every hour you spend on the game days, for all the gains you're making in terms of training and upskilling and insight, you are, for one thing, blocking any external stakeholders that might be interacting with your development level systems. And of course, you've basically shut down the entire development department of your own company. So try to compress it. And after sitting down and thinking about this for a bit and sort of shuffling around post-its on a mural board, we came up with a solution that looked a bit like this. Very nice and compact and color-coded. So the key aspects are you've got a number of teams. We decided on 6 teams, gave us a reasonable team size so that everybody could be more hands-on. We made sure that we scheduled the incidents quite closely. There is a lunch break in there. We did give people time to eat.
And the coffee break.
True. We just made sure that every team saw a variation of every incident. Some incidents were actually managed to parallelize in different flavors across different domains so that we needed a bit less time. And one more thing we kept in mind was that when we assigned the facilitators to the incidents for the schedule, we tried to make it such that a facilitator would work on the domain that they spent most time developing in, because we felt this would make for better explanations in introduction and also just give them a better basis for handing out hints and explaining background and just passing on that knowledge.
Of course, no plan is perfect, right? So we had, let's say, some minor problems, and this was mainly with how long the incidents took compared to what we expected. So we had some slots where the incidents finished earlier than we thought, and then you have a team that's a little bit bored. Like if they finish in half an hour and you have a 1 hour slot, yeah, that's not great. And we had some incidents that lasted longer. And because of this, we had some collisions with the next time slot. In hindsight, it would be a good idea to have a track manager that tries to go like in all these team rooms and try to, let's say, keep the schedule. But all in all, it was okay. So it was not that bad. So we're pretty happy with it. And yeah, I must say it went much better than what I expected.
So yeah, we've got the incidents, we've got the schedule. There is, of course, one more crucial component missing, which is the participants. So how shall we get the participants on board?
Yeah, I guess we just notify everybody by email, send them the date, and that's it.
Yeah, it's a reasonable way to go. Not just the participants, though, also, for example, product managers and anyone who would distract people from our precious game days by putting them in some meeting.
Yeah, we don't need people to jump around meetings while they're doing this. And probably we should also tell our external stakeholders that Sandbox is going to take a sick leave for 2 days.
Yeah, so we should send everyone emails. But in fact, I'm not so sure about the emails. I mean, I read my emails very carefully and I make a note of everything in my calendar, but hypothetically, somebody might miss it.
Yeah, I guess it would help if you just do a presentation where you introduce also the concept and then invite people.
That could help. But I think if you really want people to engage, you need to not just tell them something, but actually give them something to do.
Like what?
Maybe just ask them a question. How confident do you feel handling our systems?
Okay, that's an interesting thought. Okay, and then you could use this data to create mixed teams, right? So you could, based on their confidence and their experience, like put juniors and seniors together so you have some knowledge transfer going on.
That sounds very promising. Plus, it will give you a baseline for figuring out just how much better people are getting through all this effort we're putting in.
Right. And we should also call it a registration form, otherwise nobody's going to fill it.
I think that's an appropriately evil plan. So yeah, that was the preparation. Now that we had all that in place, it was finally time for the big day. So we got up Monday morning, and as one of the facilitators, I can tell you it was very exciting going into that virtual room full of people and triggering my first incident, going there and pushing the drop button on the database and making very sure it was not prod. And then waiting for the alerts to fire and waiting a bit more and realizing that apparently they weren't firing for some reason, which was how we discovered that there exist some tables in our database that you can drop and nobody ever complains about it. So, yeah. But overall, it was very exciting. It was also very fun. We got very positive feedback also from the participants. So, by the way, just the fun factor is probably another reason to do game days. I think it's a pretty cool bonding experience. But coming back to the sensible things, we did learn a lot during the game days as well. As I mentioned, one of the things we learned is that your alerting might have loopholes. But beyond that, we also just took home a huge list of improvements that we could apply to our services. It was everything from, there seem to be 2 copies of this API key, which one is actually relevant, to we should have a discussion about how we manage secret versions and everything in between, basically. Of course, we are also very happy to hear that our participants were quite happy with what they had learned, as you might remember from that slide full of shameless self-promotion earlier. But we did also ask them for more general feedback, also for things that maybe we could do better. And for example, they pointed out that maybe we could try and shuffle the schedule around in such the way that the shorter incidents were in one slot and the longer incidents in another one, so that you didn't have so many unexpected gaps in between. So yeah, lots of things learned for the next time. And speaking of the next time.
Yeah, so what's next? So first of all, Elli keeps growing like crazy. So I wouldn't be surprised if next year, we have to organize game days for 100 people.
Still ongoing.
Yes. Now, if you ask me how is this going to look like, I have no idea. Maybe you can call me again next year to tell you. But in general, when you have this scale, probably you have different groups, product groups, I mean, and then you could split the people in the different product groups and then use one of the approaches we described before. But apart from this, we also want to use game days in different ways. One idea we currently have is to use them to create competitive game days only for our incident response team. And how this is going to look like, imagine you have the incident response team, I'm going to call it IRT, and you split it into two groups, let's say. Then you put each group to design incidents as challenges for the others, so you don't have to design anything. And then you tell them, okay, once per month, you fight it off, basically, and if you solve it, you get a point. And by the end of the year, you give them a trophy, a medal, I don't know, and you have the champion of the year.
Swag.
Yes. So this idea started, the motivation behind this idea is that we don't have a lot of incidents on our production systems. Business is really happy for this, but yeah, it's not ideal for training the IRT. Apart from this idea, we have another one, which is to use game days as an onboarding tool. Of course, like the whole thing that we described, takes a lot of time, so it has a lot of organizational overhead. But what if you design incidents once and then you just use this all the time, only for new hires? So then you have, I don't know, once per month or once per quarter, when you have a lot of new people, you gather them, of course, with some more, old members of Elli, otherwise, yeah, they're going to be overwhelmed, and put them through this kind of exercises in order to see all the different domains, the full service landscape, and also the core technologies. So yeah, this could be a good tool during onboarding to get you up to speed with all our services and tools. And also it's a very good, as Katja earlier said, bonding factor. So you will also get to know people that you're going to work with. Finally, game days is just a gateway drug. So we want to reach at some point, we want to do chaos engineering. This is a huge topic, honestly, so it could have its own presentation. But what if instead of telling engineers when and where something's going to happen, you just don't tell them and then something breaks, right? This is more realistic. Yeah, in general, yeah, I'm not going to elaborate here too much, but by going to this direction, I think we can further improve our systems, make them more reliable, and yeah, bring the IRT to the next level.
So yeah, as you can see, there's no shortage of ideas for taking this to the next level. If you want to find out how that turns out, come back next year. But for today, this is all we wanted to share with you. What worked, what didn't work, what ideas we have. And we hope that you've taken something away from this, maybe even the enthusiasm to start your own game days when you go back to work on Monday. And for that, I think the only thing that remains to be said is good luck.
Right, thank you. Are there any questions?
You talked about the many learnings you achieved in terms of things that can be improved, which came out of the game day, right? All kinds of, we have alerting loopholes or whatever. If this is a very long list, how did you also have a plan how to act on this? I mean, how to really use this list now?
Yes, absolutely. So we gathered points during the game days. We had an open document where all the facilitators, or I guess anyone else as well, could just jot down points. And then afterwards, we went back through them and sort of figured out which service they pertain to and who could do something about it. And we're still not quite done, but the idea is to turn those into stories and really put them in people's backlogs and make sure that they get resolved and improved upon.
Yeah, so in the end, you get stories and you integrate them in the sprint backlog, according to which team it belongs.
You said that you collected data about the self-estimate of the people before the training. Mm-hmm. Did you also ask them afterwards? And did you see any decreases in the self-estimate?
Yeah, so we did before and after. What's embarrassing is that we didn't calculate what happened. So and we
let's just say we're still working on that very elaborate data processing step.
Yes.
Thanks for the nice talk. Did you see a change in the willingness of colleagues to participate in real incidents? Did you have enough sort of incidents before and after to see that the ones afterwards were being tackled more effectively, the real ones?
So the way it works is we have the incident response team, and you can say, I want to become a member of the incident response team. And within that team, there's a rotation who's on duty at what time. And we did have how many people saying they wanted to join after the game days?
I think we had directly 2 people that immediately after game days want to join. But let's say I think, because now we're trying to make the on-call rotation bigger, add more people. I think now we introduced 6 or 7 people.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to convince management that one day of work is a good idea for this kind of thing? Or what were your arguments?
So do we have to pass that question up the chain?
So the good thing was that we already had buy-in because management was already on board. Let's say management actually triggered these things to happen. So yeah, basically the question is, okay, how do you convince your management, right? And I think here what you could do is basically how I started my presentation, like tell them about all these incidents that happen and how expensive is the incident and scare them a little bit, basically. Because, you cannot see, it's not immediate, right? Like you can only quantify it after it happens, but when it happens, then maybe it's too late. So you should try to get by-in this way, like scare them a little bit, basically. You could use the first part of my presentation.
Have you also considered making a game day on which the participants wouldn't know when exactly it would happen, so that you could also figure out how fast they can reach out to each other and build up their teams and start working on it?
Yeah, this goes again what I said in the end to the direction of chaos engineering, where of course, like before you break something, like you make sure that it's not going to cause a disaster, but you could also run this on production for real and then see how like your incident response team reacts. But game days it's a little bit different because you have to plan this. So if you're talking about how fast they react and this kind of stuff, I would go, it's more chaos engineering and having this, let's say, chaos experiments. So yeah, did this cover the question?
Yeah, what I was going for is more like. So what I was going for is more like, you say there's going to be a game day or a game night, if you want to make it a bit more challenging, in the next month, but they do not know when exactly. And then you run the same thing as expected. Yeah, this how on a staging server also.
Yeah, this is how you do a chaos experiment. So you would tell them, okay, this week something is going to break during working hours, but you have no idea what and where. Yeah, I think this is like the top of the top. That's very good. But that's not what we did. But we're going to do it at some point.
Yeah, we're not going to say that we wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and maybe not on production from the beginning.
Something from me, it was a little bit related to what the colleague just mentioned. Is you mentioned 3 dimensions where you judged which incident to include in the list for the game days. But also you have your incident response team at that moment when you make the selection, and it's practicing responding to incidents all the time. And you see things that this team could do better. But this wasn't mentioned as a dimension there. That what is the team currently good at? Maybe to get it better across is the colleague just proposed to have to do this out of business hours at a random event. But what would this do? This could validate that the team is actually jumping to action in case of an incident. But with your team at this point in time, the actual incidents show that this is not an issue of the team. Like that's not something you need to improve with the team possibly. That's why you don't include such a random incident in your selection for the game days. And so question is like, did you also consider what did we actually need to improve as a dimension to select for the incidents for the game days?
Okay, you mean what we need to improve in the instance response team, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would have said that the game days and the way we ran them so far were more of a broader training tool to upskill everyone. So it wasn't intended specifically to address possible weaknesses in the IRT team, but I think that is an aspect we can look at to really see what were the major difficulties and then try to target those specifically.
Yeah, but maybe just to add something, I think it would be better to have the setup where we're discussing before to see this. So like you don't tell them beforehand what's going to happen and then assess, okay, how did they react when things go trill, right? Yeah.
Right, one more question here.
I suppose usually your integration environment does not trigger the on-call duty. How much effort did you put into making the integration environment for this test as much production-like in concerns of alerting? And yeah.
So we have two production environments, let's call it. Like one is the real production, and then we have this sandbox that is exactly like production, but is used for externals, third parties for testing. So they are, I would say, almost identical. So we used this, which causes some problems for the external stakeholders. That's why I said we notified them. So it's very production-like. And for this, we have already alerting in place. So we didn't have to set it up just for the game days. So does this cover the question?
So I guess as to how we ensure the similarity between this environment, sandbox, and production, I would say it's not a deliberate act where we go there and check, how similar are they actually? But rather it sort of arises from the principle just if you're writing some Terraform code to change something on production, then let's also apply that on sandbox in the same way.
Yeah, they have the same Terraform setup basically. While staging compared to production or sandbox have some differences. For example, like
less extensive database backups. That sort of thing. You
don't have replicas, read replicas in staging because it's too much money to throw away. Cool.
Great. Then thank you again. And maybe if you think of a question later, Katja and Dimi will be around a little longer. So thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of the day. And there's also an evening talk later in the ballroom if you would like to stick around. Thank you.